very much, Lynette. I have got quite a loud voice. Can you all hear me if I talk? It's always a thrill to come to Dunedin. As you can see, I have friends and family here, and it's nice to have Penguin bring me here instead of me bring myself. And also really fun to talk to a whole lot of new people about some of the things that led me to write this third book. So I thought what I would start by saying is that really it was the Ladies of Plate and the second half of the books that started me on this one, because I realised when I was doing research through all the community cookbooks that I use so much in my research for my recipes, that not only were these books filled with cakes and slices and biscuits, and they were also full of puddings. There's usually at least one chapter on puddings in a community cookbook, and often two, hot and cold puddings. And then sometimes be a third bit that's a special one on Christmas puddings or something. And so I thought this is another area of New Zealand's culinary history in which we can celebrate what women did for their families and their communities by doing great cooking. And so puddings just seem to be the logical extension from the other books, and of course What's for Pudding did seem to be a pretty good title, I have to say, when it struck me. But I kind of realised also that, as with baking when I did the other books, there seemed to have been a bit of a dropping off in the expectation of home baking, but also in the understanding and the ability to do home baking. I mean, if people brought things for a do at work or something, a lot of people would just assume that you just go and buy something. Whereas at one time in New Zealand, as we know, everything would have been homemade. But then I thought, I wonder if this applies to puddings too. And then, of course, I found this book, which some of you will know already, 365 puddings, one for every day of the year. And I thought, well, any country that could produce a book like this, that stayed in print for 10 years at least, from Whitcomb and Tombs, must be a pudding country. And the nice thing about this book, of course, is that, well, one of the terrible things is that we don't know who wrote it, because it was written by a New Zealand housewife, which is pretty shameful. Anyway, whoever she was, she did a really good job. But and of course the puddings are arranged seasonally, so you know they are for New Zealand. I did find an earlier precursor to this, probably from first published in I think 1788 by a woman called Lucy Jones, and it's called 365 Puddings, Receipts for Puddings. But hers were organised alphabetically. So we had like Mrs. Thatcher's pudding, and I think that was actually really a horrible pudding, I have to say, but it was 18th century, so yeah. But there are a lot of puddings in that book. But this one I thought was a bit of a genius, and I just thought I have to quickly, and I do this now, is find what we're supposed to be making tonight, you see, when we rush home from this talk. And it is actually preserved ginger pudding. Ooh. New Zealanders do like ginger. A lot of reasons. When you think of the baking, ginger crunch, ginger nuts, ginger gems, yeah, ginger kisses, gingerbread, everything. Okay, this preserved ginger pudding is very healthy. It has 2 cups of wholemeal, so it's wholemeal flour, and then sultanas, brown sugar, chopped preserved ginger, cinnamon, 3/4 cup of dripping, a large tablespoon of golden syrup, teaspoon of soda, mixed spice, enough milk to make a very slack mixture, steam 3 hours. Okay. But if you didn't want to do that, you could always flip over the page and find profiteroles, or all sorts of many much more exotic puddings in here. So the New Zealand housewife really spread her net quite widely when she did this book. But one of the things that I've done also when I've been giving talks about Ladies of Plate is say to people, like groups like this, what are your favourite puddings, just to find out. And of course I find that the same ones were coming up all the time. It was always going to be apple pie and rhubarb crumble, and maybe roly-poly pudding, lemon delicious, chocolate self-saucing, rice pudding, that kind of thing. Although the rice pudding is interesting because in fact rice is a milk pudding, and I did find a bit of a split on the milk pudding's front. Some people just detested them. And rice pudding, sago pudding, tapioca, whatever, and semolina, and I developed a theory based on my own family history really, and not based on anything scientific, that people who hated milk puddings have maybe been to boarding school. Because I think that those puddings can be ruined when they're made by these poor people who have to cook for scores of children, probably rather ungrateful children. Whereas a rice pudding made with love, which my own father remembered from his childhood longingly. His mother was Jemima Agnes McIndoe, and her Christmas cake is in the first book I did. She would put a rice pudding in the coal range overnight to cook slowly, and then there'd be that lovely skin on the top, you see, which my father loved. But my mother taught at a boarding school. She didn't go to one. She taught actually at John McGlashan and St Hilda's here. And so she hated them. She really wouldn't ever make them. So it fell to me, as one of the 3 daughters who like cooking, to make the rice pudding and try and recreate my father's memories of his childhood puddings. But one of the things that happened as a result, again, of giving talks about Ladies of Plate was a woman called Margaret Merton wrote to me, and I didn't know her, but she she wrote this thing which I put in my introduction. I'm going to read it to you. She said she grew up in Tuai near Waikamoana in the North Island, and her father was an engineer at the dam there or something. And this is what she said. She's probably born in the 1930s, I think. I want to tell you about my mother's insistence on giving us good milk puddings. She had been a plunket nurse and was dedicated to giving us good nutritious food. Dinners were always eaten in the middle of the day, when everybody came home from school and my father from work. So almost every dinner that I can remember, we had a milk pudding. Custards made from eggs. By the way, I have had young people say to me when they've seen this book, oh, I didn't know you could make custard from eggs. Okay, baked or made in a double boiler. Baked rice puddings. I love to have the scrapings off the side of the enamel pie dish. Sea meal, custard, sago, tapioca, junket, especially with stewed apples. For a special treat, you'd have lemon delicious pudding, pineapple foam or baked apple roll, or a steamed pudding, and we love sago plum pudding. I wanted to thank you for what you've done to remember all those women who slaved over hot stoves for our sake. And I really felt that was wonderful, because it's what I was trying to do in these books, is to acknowledge that commitment to family and to community, that whether it's taking the plate to the church supper or whatever, or putting a recipe into a fundraising book, or taking the trouble to make puddings every day for your family and create those warm and happy memories of families around the table. And I do actually think that if you have a pudding, it's a few things. First of all, it's hard for arguments to continue once the pudding comes out. I firmly believe that. Puddings tend to make people smile. And secondly, I think people just, there's this sense of, warmth and love that comes from puddings. And if you have a pudding, I reckon it stops you wandering around looking for that chocolate biscuit at 9, so why not do it? And I think milk puddings are a core thing in all these New Zealand books. I was going to show you some of my favourites. Here's Rosalind Methodist Church, by the way. This is one that, and out of this book came a wonderful pastry, which Mrs. L. Heaney put in this book, and it's typewritten cyclist style, little tiny thing, probably about 1960 something, but because everything is in imperial measurements, there's no metrics at all. But Mrs. L. Heaney's Never Failed Pastry was in my first book, and then the second book, and then I decided to give a starring role in this book because it is so wonderful. It's that one where you have equal quantities of flour and butter, and you grate the butter straight out of the fridge into the flour, and then you mix it up, and she says here, add 1 teaspoon of vinegar mixed with milk till the flakes just adhere, and roll 3 times. Now, she didn't have a lemon in the garden because she was in Dunedin, so presumably she used vinegar, but you can use lemon as well. But the thing was, because with her instruction, roll 3 times, most people actually wouldn't know nowadays what that meant, that you have to fold the pastry. And so when I decided to give this pastry a real push in this book, I actually made a bit of a change from my other books and actually included some photographs of my hands making it, which was slightly complicated because I couldn't photograph my own hands making pastry, so I got the neighbour in. But I do take all my photographs myself, apart from that one. Now I can't even find it. Here it is here. So I did a whole series of photographs so you can see. But I've made this pastry quite often, 2 or 3 times at the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, things they got me to come over, and then down at Wellington on a plate. And people really, literally are totally astonished that this mixture of butter and flour, which looks all crumbly and sticky and weird, after 2 or 3 rolls has suddenly turned into this lovely, soft, springy, beautiful pastry that will roll out, and you can lift it up and see if it's the same thickness all through. And it feels like it's some alchemical, wonderful thing, but in fact it was totally the norm at one time, so I'm working hard to get it back to being the norm. Well, that's true, yes, exactly. I did also think that some of the milk puddings had undeservedly fallen completely away, like, for example, junket and blancmange, so I thought, right, I've got to work on those. And I remember myself that I absolutely hated junket when I was a child, and then it turns out that so did Elizabeth David, so we were allowed to have hated it when we were children. She says here, and I've quoted her from her book about that, spices, salt and aromatics in the English kitchen, and she said, why was junket ever looked upon as a dish for children, since she always found it positively repellent? But then she said, nowadays I find junket rather delicious. The cool, white, shiny curd is very soothing. Its slipperiness somehow enticing. And I remember hating it as, I think partly because my mother didn't ever think to say it was what little Miss Muffet was eating when she said I'm really tough at, eating her curds away. But when I started making this ginger junket, which is from the Renko book, More Miracles with Renko, which came out in the 1930s. This is a lovely recipe. You crush up a ginger nut, put it into each dish, pour on the junket, which you thicken with rennet, set with rennet. Has anybody lost already? Everybody know what rennet is? Mm-hmm. Yeah, stage one of making cheese, and a lot of people do actually make cheese now, so there's more. People have said, no, you can't buy rennet, and you can. It might even be moving down from the top shelf in the supermarket soon because of home cheese makers. Anyway, what happens with the ginger nut, it kind of floats up through the junket and gets instead, so in a kind of a nice soft way. Then you put a bit of whipped cream and some crystallised ginger on top, and you bring it out after dinner, and people who haven't had it before are completely surprised. And they say, what is it? It's not panna cotta, and it's not yogurt, and you say it's junket. And so, but I am also aware that the name isn't particularly appealing. But then I found out that it actually came from the French word, this is in the Oxford Companion to Food, jonquette, Jonquette, which is apparently a word for a basket made of reeds that you would drain the curds in a way. And then someone told me in a bookshop in Wellington a couple of days ago that the reed that you used for that was called, the botanical name was Juncus, Juncus. So okay, it has a pedigree, that name, even if it's rather unpleasant. But then blancmange is the other one I thought, or shape, that people had kind of forgotten about it. So, and also had an idea that it was horrible. But in fact, this coconut blancmange, which I have made several times, like made it on TV the other morning, it's actually incredibly light and delicious and pleasant, and if you have it with a bit of nice jam or fruit, it's a winner. So I'm on a bit of a campaign to get milk puddings back into it. And I also, then I found this wonderful book, The Milk Vendor's Cookbook. Now this is about 1947. Filled with all sorts of wonderful quotes. For example, milk keeps you looking younger and feeling younger. It helps you keep the youthful freshness of your skin. And then another one, similarly saying, milk gives you buoyant health, vibrant energy and long life. And I think the same about cream actually. I always liked Nigella Lawson's comment that cream was like internal moisturiser. You need a little bit every day. This book had wonderful recipe for ice cream. The apricot ice cream in this book comes from this one. It's just a really nice light custard made not with 12 egg yolks, just with 2 whole eggs and a pint of milk. Make the custard and then make the ice cream. And of course ice cream is the other milk pudding that I felt needed to be revived as a homemade thing, because I'd sort of got a bit tired of seeing recipes, particularly in magazines, mainly from professional chefs, suggesting that in order to make ice cream you need 8 egg yolks and 2 pints of cream. And I thought, well, we used to make ice cream, whether it was with evaporated milk, which Auntie Jessie used to make every day, Chef Warren, evaporated milk whipped up, or sweet and condensed milk, or just milk made into custard with eggs, or in this first recipe in my book, I've got a plain vanilla ice cream, which is actually made with milk thickened with rennet, like as if you're making junket, add a bit of cream and then make the ice cream. And what you end up with is an ice cream that is slightly crystalline, but it's got a lovely flavour in it. And it reminds me of Frosty Jack ice cream, which used to be served in Wellington. And I found a great Frosty Jack advertisement which said in the Evening Post 1925, if you want to be healthy, wealthy and wise, eat Frosty Jack ice cream and Eskimo pies. Pretty good. So I decided I would do ice creams in variety, and I made the ice cream for the book in these shallow aluminium trays, the kind that we used to have in the fridge. Yeah, well, you could take that bit out, the handle for the ice cubes. But they freeze really well, because in the census in 1956 it said that half of New Zealand households had a refrigerator, which of course means that half of them didn't have a refrigerator, but still a lot of people had fridges and were able to make ice cream. And you started to get ice cream recipes in all the community books. They were coming in all the time. And so I thought, okay, we need a few ice creams, so I've got a few in there, and none of them with 8 egg yolks, I have to say. And then I thought, well, if ice cream, you've got to have jelly. And so jelly also is the other thing. I think probably the first thing I made when I was a child was packet jelly. I think probably we didn't think so much about food colourings in those days, because I have this other memory of cordial that we used to make by getting the big aluminium preserving pan, putting in a 6-pound bag of sugar and then a bottle of the cordial concentrate and then a bit of hot water and then stir it with a wooden spoon and pour it into bottles and have it with water. And I mean, maybe, anyway, it didn't seem to kill us, that's what we used to eat. But then I decided, well, the books again had lots of recipes for jellies made with orange juice or sometimes with wine, but basically with fruit juices. And often the blancmange type recipes using corn flour to thicken the liquid were also made with fruit. So you have a fruit blancmange. Anyway, I decided once I was going to have jellies, I had to try and make a rainbow jelly. And I think I'm most proud of this photograph in the whole book. I think it's not bad. And these are packet jellies, I have to say. But when I was doing this book, because I make everything myself and take the photographs, and then there's a lot of puddings left around the house, and it was all right because I could, ring people up and say, come over and get this. But the puddings of it, I can't really run around town with puddings. And I realised that we had a family of 6 on one side, a family of 4 on the other side, 2 people over the road and 2 at the back. But right, there's 14 people. They can all have puddings while this is happening. And one family had a little 7-year-old girl, Sadie, and she actually came to the door when I arrived with this particular jelly on its pedestal plate. And I've never forgotten her face. It was utter delight. She just couldn't believe her eyes. And one of the reasons I think was that particular shape of jelly, which is a stepped cone, is actually almost scientifically proven to be the wobbliest jelly possible. I mean, you can barely even move it without it sort of turning its over. And I think anything that comes to the table kind of smiles at you and waves at you is kind of quite appealing. That is actually, I found that statistic out, by the way. This shows how people who work in museums are a bit ludicrous, but there's a man called Peter Breers who was for many years director of museums in the north of England, and often they have big collections of kitchen equipment and cooking equipment from 18th century, early centuries earlier. And he got obsessed with all those beautifully ornate ceramic moulds that you see a lot, as well as the beautiful copper ones, but the ceramic ones, which are actually quite difficult to get fruit jellies out of, to be honest. But for savoury jellies they will work, and also for blancmange, which doesn't need any heat, it just comes out by itself. But he's the one who said that he came upon this scientific reading of the wobbliest jelly. And I think you can get all these moulds that make all different, that are in different shapes, but that particular shape, I think just an ordinary, symmetrical shape is actually a really good way to go. And so jellies became a sort of another little sub-theme in this book. It sort of emerged fairly sort of organically from my research. But I also looked for, with this book I realised also that when I was comparing recipes, as I did for the other books, that I wanted to have other versions of things. I didn't want to have just one version of the chocolate South saucing pudding, because people were telling me about their mother left out the walnuts and their mother put in sultanas and their mother did, and I thought, okay, we'll have some variations. So I'd have a little bit at the bottom of the page, or try this version, you see. But occasionally I couldn't resist putting in something that was just crazy, and I'm going to read you this one here because it's from a woman, it's actually an English book. And it's a woman called Nancy Shaw, 1936, a book called Food for the Greedy, which seemed to be a particularly good title. And it's a recipe for fruit salad and jelly. Now, it's not actually fruit set in jelly, it's actually, well, I'll read it out to you. Make an ordinary wine jelly. That's what we all do all the time. But with a mixture of rum and maraschino, and even sometimes a little sherry, or anything else that's going. Make it into a jelly, set it, and then she said, wait for it, break it up, break it up into pieces, add it to the fruit salad. It's a great improvement to an ordinary fruit salad. Instead of actually making the fruit all soggy by pouring alcohol all over it, have the alcohol in little gem-like bits of jelly. It seemed to me to be a nice idea. That's right. The other thing I discovered in doing all my research was, I just took one more jelly thing. This is another lovely book which I'm sure I got at Optigan Books. So a lot of my, this was a 1915 version of Colonial Everyday Cookery, which went on being produced by Whitcomb and Turns into the 1960s. It stopped being colonial and just became everyday cookery. This early version seems to be pretty dependent on Mrs. Beeton and some of the earlier encyclopedia cookbooks that have a lot of household information in them as well as. But this is lovely. Opposite the ad for Scott Brothers Engineers and the really lovely Cole Range there, is a preface to the 5th edition which says that it's 100 additional pages and a much fuller treatment of all topics, especially those of savouries, preserves, laundry work and the sundries of household management, while to further extend the scope of this book, entirely new chapters on vegetarian cookery. It's not bad for 1915. Ices of all kinds and serviette folding with useful diagrams for explanatory purposes. So I loved it. But this book has odd photographs in it, and this one, at the beginning of the chapter on jellies, creams, moulds, not meaning of course mould on things, and pretty sweet dishes, had this crazy photograph of a ribbon jelly on a plate with 3 passion fruit creams around the base of it. So I thought, I'm going to make it. And actually the apricot cream in this book is out of it. So I'm going to show you the photograph that I did, because I was quite proud of it, I have to say. It did look vaguely inedible, but it was edible. This is made with orange and grape jellies, grape juice, and then I did the passion fruit creams as well. So it looks a little bit like Bakelite actually, but it did actually tasted pretty good. Oh, that's good fun. But the other thing I found also was, of course, fruit was coming up all the time. You know, using preserved fruit. And I mean, I wouldn't actually win any prizes because the plums have risen up in the jar a little bit there, and so the apricots, but they tasted great. But I think that, yeah, I'm not on too competitive cooking. It's all just about having fun. But I thought I really was interested in the fact that New Zealand, as a country where a lot of fruit is grown, had a really good tradition of fruit puddings, whether it's the toppings you put on fruit puddings or including fruit in puddings, and not just dried fruit, you know, or fresh fruit cropped up all the time. And so that was another little sub-theme in the book. Bread and butter puddings were a bit of a complicated one because they kind of fitted into that area of being either loved or utterly detested. But I thought, well, I've got to have them there, and made quite a few and got more and more excited about how delicious they can be, and not actually heavy and stodgy at all, but really light and wonderful. I did have, I have to say though, I was going to show you, this is actually a fantastic book if anybody Dunedin Gas Department. This is written by Miss I. Finley, who was formerly the Home Science Department at Dunedin Technical High School. I think this is about 1945 and 1940, and a brilliant, actually the Bacon Egg Pie, my first book, was straight out of that one. Anyway, lost my track. Oh, yes. No, I've moved on. It's Sago now. Because Sago is the other thing people are either going to say, you know, frogs' eggs and frogs' eyes or whatever, or they adore it. Anyway, lemon sago ended up being the one cold pudding that was constantly coming up when I asked people their favourite puddings. So I did do a lemon sago, and then I found that a friend of mine's mother always called it golden sago, which I thought was a good way of making it seem a little bit more glamorous. The one that really just about threw me absolutely sideways was this business of sago plum pudding, which you remember that Margaret Merton mentioned it as a favourite, and I had a lot of people say this to me. Now, I should say I knew I needed a few Christmas puddings, because that's what's traditional in the old books, and I knew that our family didn't have a Christmas pudding recipe. My mother always made this, which I call Paula's Jelly Pud, which is actually alcoholic jelly filled with soaked dried fruit. It's actually absolutely beautiful. She based it on a Davis gelatine recipe, but she changed it from sherry jelly to port and port and fruit juice. And you probably remember that. But I didn't have a family recipe for Christmas pudding. And I thought, well, I did get one eventually, but in the meantime, the sago plum pudding was coming up all the time from people saying, oh, we may have that instead of Christmas pudding, it's much lighter and more delicious. And the sago in it replaces the suet. Anyway, so then I got a recipe with a pedigree, which I thought this would be great. And the artist Peter McIntyre, his wife Patty made it, and their son Simon's wife Sarah gave me Patty's recipe. And I thought, right, oh, this is good. And put it aside, and then when I was working on the book, I made it, and looked fine, and boiled it for 2.5 hours, you know, got the bowl and turned it out on the plate, all ready to go, lift the bowl up, the whole thing just went all over the plate. And a bit disappointing. So then I thought I'd try again, soaked the sago for longer, did various things. Anyway, cut a long story short, I did it 3 times. Every time it was just a slurry on the plate. And so, first of all, I just thought I'm going to go crazy. My husband said, oh, just leave it out. I said, I can't leave it out. It's in every book, I have to mark it. And then I rang up Sarah and she said, oh, I've never made it actually. Patty is dead now. Oh, heck. And then Malcolm tasted one of these ones. He said, you've got to get it. It's fabulous. It tastes so wonderful. So it's very spicy and delicious. So then someone gave me a recipe for it which had an egg in it. And that actually for me made the difference. But I'm sure some better cooks than I can make it without an egg, but I can't. So, but at least I know that if you make this one with the egg in it, it will actually stick together when you turn it out. But I did also need to find a Christmas plum pudding, and I just thought I'd use an example of telling you how I compare recipes, because there are many. I mean, there's hundreds of recipes for Christmas pudding, and people will always say this is our family one, it's wonderful, and this one's got no flour and only breadcrumbs, or less this or more that. And so I compared about 18 or 20 recipes for it. Now what I do is I have a spreadsheet, and I'll have the names of all the books across the top, the names of the ingredients down the side, and then I fill in everything, and then I can sort of scan across and see this one's got more eggs and less flour or more whatever. And then I did a percentage comparison with the amount of cake mixture for the amount of fruit. So, and I found that the New Zealand recipes, because I included some from Mrs. Beat in 1860s, Elizabeth Raffles up 1780 recipes, and ended up realising that New Zealand recipes actually had more fruit in them than cake. The British ones tend to be, maybe people were better off here, I don't know, but they were. But the best one of all was from this book here, which is, this is something called Dine with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth Messenger in the 1950s wrote a column in the Evening Post. She's the most brilliant cook and a real queen of puddings, I have to say. She makes wonderful puddings. Anyway, I thought her recipe looked the best, and I made it. It was fantastic. The only thing was that she had dates in it. I thought, I know we use dates a lot in New Zealand baking, but I think Christmas pudding needs prunes because they're plums and it's a plum pudding, so I put that in. But then I had the trouble of, with each of my books I've had one photograph with candles or flame in it, and I thought I've got to have the flaming Christmas pudding. And remember, this is a family that never has a flaming Christmas pudding. So anyway, I made it, set up the camera as usual, and said to my husband, you're going to have to rush over from the stove with the flaming pot of brandy and pour it over, then pull your hand back and go get the photo, you see. And honestly, we never had a divorce over it. I kept on taking photographs that were out of focus, or his hand was still under the pot, was still in it. Anyway, we got it in the end. But I knew I also had to have baked Alaska, because for me that was my mother's absolute proof of genius, that she could put ice cream in the oven and it didn't melt, you know. And it's a bit of a 70s clip. Do anyone know what baked Alaska is? Oh, right. And so anyway, I knew I had to have flames on that one too, so I thought, right, I'd better get the neighbour in again, the person who took the photographs of me making the pastry, and organised a whole lot of people to join us actually, and we made it. And then I poured the brandy, and I must say it did get slightly over. I know, it's quite hard. Well, I started off with just a little bit of brandy in the eggshell with the sugar cube in there, and that was flaming around. So I thought, oh, just pour a bit more, and I thought, just pour the whole lot over. And it was fantastic, I have to say. But, ridiculous one. But generally speaking, I do, as I said, I do take the recipes, the photographs myself, and I found that I had to think differently about the look of the book. I wanted it to feel like it was in the same family as the other books, but not identical. And I thought, if I can't have embroidered tablecloths everywhere, as you could have when you're doing afternoon teas. This is meals, and so you've got to have the dishes looking as though people are eating them around the table. And that's what I did. But I did include 2 pieces of handcraft, and the person who made them is sitting in the front row, and they're absolutely beautiful. They are pieces of tatting made by Nari Barnes. Here is one of the very special puddings pages right on top of it. And the other one is underneath the wonderful Mrs. Beaton's recipe for cup custards that are also very lovely, sitting on a nice heavy tray, and that's a piece of cream tatting. And I bought these at Variety Handcrafts and tracked down Nairi, who is here today. It's lovely to meet her, and I actually got 2 more pieces of her tatting today at Variety Handcrafts. So I was thrilled to be able to include some examples of handwork, because I just am always impressed with what women have made, as well as what they, in terms of handcraft as well. And also Bronwyn's Times, who's sitting there, sent me some fabulous embroidery recently from
Shop on Carol.
What was that?
Shop on Carol.
All right, there you go. She's found a whole lot for me. So the book still has a kind of a slightly retrospective feel to the design of it, and I also, in this part of the book, wanted to include actual photographs of some of the women whose recipes are in the book, and also some of the book covers. And I was really pleased that I have a recipe in here from, this is a book, it should be from Dunedin, but it's not. It's Canterbury Caledonian Society Highland Pipe Band book, 1960s. And I was delighted to see in the Auckland newspaper just 2 or 3 weeks ago that this very pipe band had managed to get enough money to get to the piping championships in Scotland, even though their hall had just been demolished after the earthquake. But I was also very keen to try to find out more about this woman, Elizabeth Messenger, because I've got several of her books in here, of her recipes rather. So I went to Alexander Turnbull National Dictionary Biography online and found quite a good biography of her, and she was extraordinarily productive in her recipes and the other things she did in her life. But I found that she'd retired to, oh that's right, they had the biography but no photograph. And so I read the biography and found she and her husband had retired to Kerry. So I got on the phone book on the internet and looked up Messenger, Kerry, there's an M Messenger, rang him up. He said, she's my mother. And I said, well, he said they had to eat every single thing that was in any of these columns. But I said, have you got a photograph of her? And he said, yes, and this is beautiful, I mean you can't see if I hold it up, but a beautiful studio photograph by Spence Digby taken in Wellington, which has now gone to the Turnbull Library to go onto the website. So little connections like that have really made my day, and I've had other odd things happen when I've been given talks. One was, I often talk when I talk about Ladies of Plate about the cinnamon oyster being invented by Mrs. Douglas Brown of Anderson's Bay, who put it in the League of Mothers cookbook, and I know that because Helen Leach did all the research on the first appearance of that recipe. And I sometimes have to say to younger people that her name is not Douglas actually, that's her husband's name, even though Mrs. Douglas Brown. And, but I never knew who she was. And then I was giving a talk and someone said, she's Thelma, she taught me piano at Anderson's Bay. And so I got a lovely connection. And then in Christchurch there was just another one too. There's this gorgeous recipe that I got from the Menorah cookbook, which is the Jewish women's cookbook that came out in the 60s in Auckland to raise money for a new synagogue. And there was a recipe for a Viennese chocolate nut cake, which I put in that first book. And the recipe was, I do think it's quite a bit photo too, I have to say. And it's a very nice cake. And from Mrs. F. Kral, K-R-A-L, I had to get him to know who she was. And then I found the studio cookbook from Christchurch, which Yvonne Russ, the potter, put together to raise money for a new craft studio in Christchurch, which Peter Bevan was going to design. I don't think it ever happened actually, but there in that book was recipes for a Viennese weekend from Mrs. F. Kral, who with her husband Dr. Kral were very good sort of hosts in Dunedin. And then a woman came to the talk in Christchurch. She said that Dr. Kral had been her doctor and they'd recently made contact with his children who live in Israel. I mean, so it's all the old 2 degrees of separation that goes on in New Zealand. Anyway, I decided also partly because of what I thought about in terms of moving on to this book from the baking books, that I wanted to do one more book that reflected some of the real gems of New Zealand cooking, which I think are the pickles and preserves and jams and fruit recipes. So that's going to be my next project, which I will be working on all next year, I think, because I need to have a whole year. You can't sort of make tamarind chutney when there's no tamarind, so you've got to do. And I thought I'd also include fruit liqueurs, which I've just suddenly, not really in most of the Christian Church cookbooks, but haven't. They are actually very delicious. And I've made a few with kumquats and pineapple, and just fruit with brandy and sugar, but you have to have enough brandy to make sure it doesn't start fermenting, and leave it for a year or so, and then take the fruit out and eat it if you like, and then you get these lovely liqueurs, which are actually a nicer way of flavouring puddings than using bought essences, although it seems that Hansel's did sponsor almost every community cookbook that came out, because there's always those ads for Hansel's essences along the bottom. But if you cannot use those ones, it's probably a little bit better. But I'm looking forward to doing preserves and seeing how I get on with all my trying out all new things. But I've also got quite a number of recipes coming through to me from people already for nice preserves, and so I'll try to do the same thing I've done with the others. That the recipes are made with basic ingredients. They're not made with super expensive ingredients, but they appeal to today's palate, because I need to tell you, a guy on the radio said to me the other day, oh, have you got banoffee pie? And I said, oh, I don't, that's disgusting. So I actually decided I'm not writing a history book, I'm trying to write a book that people might like to make things from, And I don't have to include everything, and I can't include things if I hate them. And I also can't include anything that, just for historical curiosity. It should actually taste good. So I did make a few things. Some of the suet puddings I tried to make I gave up on. The Christmas pudding has suet in it, and it's wonderful, but I realised that I just wasn't good enough to do those. I didn't have the... So, although, getting back to sago plum pudding, by the way, someone just told me she always makes it in a crock pot or a slow cooker overnight for Christmas, so she doesn't have to have the kitchen turning into a sauna, which I had as the 2 or 3 versions of it all got boiled out. So I feel as though, the preserves thing is something I really would like people to go back to having fun with, and more people seem to be gardening and growing fruit, and also I'm interested in the fact that sometimes you give people some jam and say, oh, it's lovely, I don't eat jam, I never have toast. I think, well, actually, why not have the jam on the rice pudding, or have it on, in a jam roll, or fold it in some whipped cream and put it through a cake, or all the other things you can do with those preserves that aren't just about putting them on bread and butter. And I thought, well, in the preserves book, I'd try to include some of those things as well. There is another book that I absolutely, is an absolute New Zealand gem, is this one, Triple Tested. Now, this is Mrs. Thelma Christie, who wrote it for the Lower Hutt Plunket in 1957, and I've got a couple of recipes out of it here, particularly the one just one I think in this book, I've got some other ones, but there's this gorgeous pineapple meringue shortcake, which I think she actually invented. I generally believe in the evolutionary theory of recipes, but the pineapple version certainly she invented, but has anybody made this one? Do you know? You would make a shortcake and put it in 2 tins with the egg yolks, and then you... it's more like a sponge cake than a shortcake. And then you put meringue on top, and one of the meringues you put some almonds on and you cook them. When you take them out, you put one meringue side down on the plate, and cream in front of it, and the other one meringue side up. And you end up with a cake that looks like it's got 5 layers, but you've only made 2 cakes. And I've found other versions of this in New Zealand books. One that I made recently had, when I think of it, damson jam folded through the cream, and then it was grated chocolate on the cake and cinnamon and chocolate on the top. So a lot of these basic recipes can really take off, and this has not a huge amount of complicated ingredients. Just getting back to Elizabeth, I will stop and get someone else. I'm rabbiting on now. Elizabeth Messenger, I thought I've got to include one recipe with the biscuit crumb crust, because that can't, and not going to be the banoffee pie. So, and I found this one in Elizabeth Messenger's book, and it's called Peaches and Cream Pie. Now, this is why she put it in her column. I'm going to read out what she said. 1956. For the Masterton reader who wrote to me this week asking for more party puddings and mentioning that as she lived in the country, eggs and cream were no hurdle. Oh, that's great. Nowadays we're not allowed to eat eggs and cream, but then it was just she had lots of them, so what could she make from it? She says, I suggest this delightful peaches and cream chiffon pie, which may well be noted by anyone in search of a special occasion pudding, for it is utterly luxurious, dainty and delicious, and the crumb crust is made with crispy biscuits that have got coconut in them, and then peaches, and then the chiffon filling, and then I decorated this one, I'm going to show you in a moment, in exactly the way she described, and it basically makes everyone burst out laughing. It's rosettes of cream, each one topped with a little bit of glacé cherry, and in between a slice of peach rolled in coconut. And I thought, this is totally crazy. And my sister was saying to me the other day, I look at that and I can't imagine eating it, whereas that one I can just fall upon. However, when I made this one, and I thought, I'm going to do exactly what she says. I'm not going to be snooty about her decorating style. And I made it, we had friends around for a meal and we'd been outside eating in the garden, and then I rushed inside and got this out and put it on the table and said, okay, come in for pudding. And look, people just went crazy over it. And again, it makes you laugh just the same way as the jellies do. And I think there's no harm in having a pudding that looks funny. If it tastes wonderful, why not just enjoy it? Yeah. So anyway, that's how I came to be doing What's for Pudding, and that's what I'm about to do next. And I'll be really happy to have any comments or stories or preserves recipes thrown at me or for the next book. Anybody got anything they're desperate to ask or whatever? Yeah.
What's your address?
My address. 21 Turrakina Street, Greyland.
Do you attend sales and fairs and so forth where those books and the scrapbooks.
Yes, I did early on, and when I first started working on these books, so I had my mother's, and I had some that actually Mary and my cousin who's sitting here, and David, her husband, sent up to me from Dunedin, and then I realised I actually wanted more. I got this sort of like the scent of whatever, and I went to 2 or 3 of those book fairs, you know, the Variety Club and the various charities that run book fairs. And then when I was in Dunedin, occasionally doing things with Dunedin Art Gallery, I'd always go to Octagon Books, and because of course Otago University has been teaching the history of food for so long, those people really knew that these books were significant and not just rubbishy. But yes, I know the handwritten ones are wonderful too. In fact, this one here, this is Brown and Paulson's Summer Dishes. Now, because Brown and Paulson made corn flour, and New Zealand we had Fielders and Edmonds as well, but Aunt Daisy stood behind Brown and Paulson's, because if you go online and listen to Aunt Daisy on would it be Radio New Zealand Archive, I think they've got 2 or 3 of her programs, and in one of them she is talking about Brown and Paulson's corn flour, the only corn flour to use to make blancmange anyway. But this one actually is a British publication, priced 1 penny, and I found it in a book, a handwritten book that a friend lent me, and the book was the recipe book of her Aunt Edie, who was the cook at the Hiratonga Golf Club in the 1940s, and so she kept these recipes, and then I was allowed to take them. And in fact, again, I mean, this probably, I don't know when this would be, probably the 1890s or something. There are recipes for blancmange with ratafias, you know, crushed up macaroons in it and things like that, and really lovely, sophisticated, light and pretty recipes, and simple trifle and gooseberry fool. They're not heavy, hard-going recipes. So yes, but what I've tried to do is actually stop now, because I said I can't make everything, and it becomes a little bit ridiculous, and my filing system's getting slightly out of control. But what I do is I have my main recipe books organised by the part of New Zealand they're from, and then other ones that I do use less often I've got organised by year. So I think, okay, 50s, I'll just have a quick look to see what's there. And I've got another couple of boxes of the ones that come from companies, whether it's Renko or the stove companies, and even Laurel Petroleum brought out a lot of recipe books. They seem to be around. And they often do put the name of the person who wrote it, so that's always good. Some home economists or person getting paid to write recipes for companies, as they still are today, and they are part of our history as well as the community ones. But I'm always thrilled when I, as I said, find the name of someone, then find a connection and realise I've done a little bit to try to bring that person back into the limelight and thank them for what they've done. So that's really my whole...
It's really having the photographs.
It is
My
actually.
husband did a very good thing. All my cuttings that I've got, is
Yes.
I've typed them all up for you, typed them all up, and I've never made one since because it hasn't got the picture.
Oh. But then you see, there's no pictures in these. How the heck would you know what was going to happen with them? Most of these recipes are a bit of a mystery train, you know. You kind of think, I don't know what it's going to look like. Which was the other reason I knew I had to have photographs in my book, because otherwise people won't try things. But I hope they will try some of the little ideas that are in here as well as the main recipes, because I think that most of them are worth giving a go. And certainly, for me, as I said, everything in here tastes pretty good. I don't think there's things that are, you know, a bit of an ordeal to eat or anything. I think they're all well, I hope not anyway. And I think that, you know, someone said, again in an interview I was doing on this tour, was they say the breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I said, well, try leftover pudding, it's probably the best meal of the day. I mean, we put this golden syrup steamed pudding, a little bit of that leftover heated up makes a pretty good breakfast, and I think leftover rice pudding is probably the best breakfast imaginable. But I wanted to have a cover which, as it felt a bit different from the others, but still had the plate on it, and I thought there can't be any food on this cover. This is a big question, and so there'll be one answer on the back, but if you have a look inside, there's a few more as well.
I've got a question. Have you ever looked at a recipe and gone, oh, that would be great, and then tried it and it's been disgusting?
Yeah, I have actually. There was actually a one I thought would go in the first book, and because I love those mad names that recipes were given, all the kisses and whispers and pretty names that people used to give, and I made something, I think they're called sunbeams, and they were something really pretty, and it was short pastry that you served with jam and coconut and then rolled it and then cut and made, and actually it was revolting. I don't know why, the pastry wasn't any good, and I thought they'd look pretty, but they didn't. But generally speaking, I think that was in the early days. I mean, I have learned a lot doing these books. I mean, it's become in the last 5 years something I've spent a huge amount of time. And I know people find it a bit weird to think, oh, I'm going to do a spreadsheet and compare 7 different recipes for Lemon Delicious, and I can't think of a better way to spend the afternoon. And most people would think, give me a break, you know. But I do really enjoy it. I feel like I'm on a trail of discovery. And I love it when people email me and say they've made things. And letters like that one from Margaret Merton just mean the world, because it just means that the books have triggered something. And I feel like with the baking books, to be honest, almost like got nothing to do with me anymore. They are a sort of passport into memories for many people. I mean, I pulled them together, but I didn't create those recipes. I just made them and put them out there. And people are saying all the time that they make them and they remind them of family and home. And so I think, well, that's fine. And they're out there in the world doing their own jobs now. You know?
I've got a good question.
Yeah.
How do you make jelly if you don't have the crystals?
You use gelatin. You have to use gelatin. But you can also, but then you can use corn flour. So you can, if you've got some tamarillos or something stewed up, or I keep saying tamarillos, but you know, any fruit or plums or something, you can just heat them up, mix in some corn flour, which you've already dissolved in some other milk, and it will set. And then you get, somehow that moves into another realm from just being sloppy fruit. And but I have had some mad, there was, when we were in Christchurch yesterday, this woman was talking about her favourite pudding, which I thought was as an example of how memory clings around puddings and sweet things. She said if her mother was out, she grew up on a farm, the mother was out when the bread was delivered, the kids would run out and get the bread, cut a really big slice of bread, white bread, and then put a lot of butter so you could see your teeth in it when you grated it, and then jam, and then pour liquid cream over and each over the sink. I don't think I need to put that in my book, but anyway, you all know now. It would make everybody laugh and immediately bring back memories of naughty things you used to do, you know, when you were a child. And the other one, this other woman said she just used to make a chocolate custard and put coconut on the top and whipped cream, and her children just were in heaven. I think anything with chocolate people love, and chocolate blancmanges and the 365 recipes actually. And a lot of these very simple recipes still have this power to transport us and to be pleasant to eat. Custard certainly I think is pretty hard to beat generally.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've got 2 questions. How many cookbooks do you think you've got, and how long does it take to research on your cookbooks?
In my general cookbooks that I own, look, I've never counted them, but I do have a lot. In fact, my husband has made me some new bookshelves recently. I probably have, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds, you know. But I don't buy every new book that comes out. I tend to like books that have some sort of historical aspect to them and story. And if I added in all these old ones that I've got, you're getting up probably 1,000. But in terms of the time it takes, this book here, the research would be going on most of last year, but I was doing some other work at the same time for Auckland Art Gallery. I did an exhibition, and then I'd be doing that. And then when that exhibition opened in November, I started full-on writing. And then once I have my text all done, then what I do, once I've typed up the recipe, done the spreadsheets, typed up the recipe, then I will make it again following my own instructions completely and trying not to ever assume anything, because you can easily forget to put something in the instructions because you think it's obvious, and then when you go to make it, you think, oh, I forgot to say that, and then make it again for photography. So that period is probably about 4 or 5 months full time, yeah. But I always wake up and think, well, what am I making today? Oh, goody, you know. And it was nice to sort of be, it was my job. It was my job to be making puddings instead of my little hobby on the side that I, you know. So yeah, I feel enormously fortunate. It just seems to have been good fun from start to finish, and pleasant to know that people have enjoyed them, you know. Yeah.
Excluding your 3 cookbooks, if you could only own 3, which would they be?
My own ones.
Yeah.
Elizabeth David, Jane Gregson. I probably have good things from Jane Gregson. Elizabeth David, I think, probably French country cooking. And I would also have a man called Arto de Haroutunian, a book called Sweets and Desserts of the Middle East that came out in the 1980s. Arto de Haroutunian was an Armenian restaurateur in London. He wrote about half a dozen books about Middle Eastern food before Claudia Roden's book started coming out. And that particular book, the Sweets and Desserts of the Middle East, is still the most wonderful book for desserts. And of course, they tend not to eat desserts in the same way that we do. They eat sweet things in between meals. Or in Europe, of course, they're usually things you eat with coffee between meals rather than having at the end of a meal. So, but I mean, the writing of people like Elizabeth David and Jane Gregson is so wonderful, and they are so knowledgeable about history and cultures as well as about food. And they were actually home cooks. I mean, neither of them were trained as chefs. Not that I have anything against chefs trained, but I don't have it. I just have an interest in food and food history and filling around the kitchen. What would be your favourite three?
The Alison Hobbs Big Red one.
Oh yeah, that one, yes. That's actually, it is very good actually. I mean, all her recipes work, they're brilliant.
Yeah.
But she doesn't say where they come from. And that, for me, that's become my obsession, you see. So I always want to know where did this come from. And even, I mean, you see, Thelma Christie with this one that I talked about, the pineapple meringue cake. Now that's actually, Lorraine Jacobs got that in the listener this week, and she talks about her own memories of it, but she doesn't ever acknowledge Thelma, you see, and I actually, because I get it from Leo. But then, that's me, and not everybody has to do the same things as I do, but that's my real passion, is trying to kind of work out how things developed and give credit to the people who develop recipes.
She says that she had started cooking in the 70s when she was in Paris. So what date was
59.
Oh, I see.
And in fact, I've actually made a mistake. There is a sort of version of it in another book, an British book called Talking About Cakes with an Irish and Scottish Accent by a woman called Margaret Bates, which came out in 1964, maybe earlier even. She is amazing, Margaret Bates, and there's a wonderful photograph of her in the back with these fabulous I think, actually I really need to backtrack. I think probably Thelma Christie, Margaret Bates, sort of about the same time, but opposite sides of the world, so who knows. I'm not aware of any sort of precedent for that particular style of cake in either American books or in British ones or European ones. I mean, I do always look at The Joy of Cooking and the Culinary Institute American book from about the 1960s, which is a great big thick encyclopedia of American cooking. Because, see, Aunt Daisy went to America in 1955, I think, and came back and produced a book with recipes from America. She was always keen on America, and so she started to bring in my belief, American recipes for cakes and those cheesecakes and things that we hadn't had here before, and sort of giving us a little bit of a swivel away from the connection to the UK as being our main source of baking and desserts and that kind of thing. I've got the book of her in America, and there's a lovely photo of her talking to a film star. And with her hat on, and I don't know, I've got no who he was. He's completely unknown, but she's famous.
We've probably got time for one more question, if anyone would like to.
Have you ever found yourself getting in hot water for having a cherry on top of a Belgian biscuit rather than dairy
I've got a really big telling off in Balclutha actually. A woman said to me when she said, "Oh, you never get away with the cherry on top of your Belgian biscuit down here." The thing is, that's how my mother made them, and I didn't actually. I do say that white icing and red sugar has its adherents. I think I say here, but. No, there it is, you see. The problem is that because I've never entered any competitions, I don't actually know these things. And so I just thought they're gorgeous, and my mother always made them with the cherry on top. But no, I was told it in no uncertain terms. But I was quite pleased with this because that they were changed from German biscuits to Belgian biscuits in the First World War. And I found this lovely cloth which had poppies, and so I thought in Flanders fields the poppies grow, so I put them on there, but no, they are completely inaccurate.